Good evening. Good evening. Wow, what a turnout. Pretty gutsy to show up tonight. Don't you think? Yeah. Well, welcome to Friends Night Out, which is offered to you by Friends of the Library. I'm Paulette LeBlanc, and I'm president of Friends of the Library. And I'm here tonight with my sidekick, Bonnie Briscoe. Stand up. Right? Right? My partner in crime. Okay. And we're going to be offering a really interesting program for you tonight. But this night comes with a story. And if you've heard the story, I apologize. But it's worth sharing because it's going to set the stage for what's going to happen tonight. Over a year ago, Bonnie and I were doing research on the First Ladies because we were getting ready to celebrate Women's History Month by way of a First Ladies presentation. In fact, we did that for 2 years. And we came across this book called Gutsy Women. And look at the authors, mother and daughter team. And the book fascinated me. First of all, the title caught me right away, so that did it. But as we started looking at the book, we started formulating this idea of, Women's History Month, 2026. We could do something with this book. So we kept looking. We each bought our own copy, and we've been reading it through the year. And we decided we are going to do a presentation with this. But guess what? You have had enough of the Paulette and Bonnie show. We've done different shows over the past 3 years. So we said we need to recruit our own Graham County Gutsies. Those who dare to get up tonight and do a presentation before you featuring women who have really made a difference to all of us. So we started looking at these gutsy women that we've chosen, and there are 11 of them. 11 of them because there were 11 chapters in the book. So we said every woman is going to get a different chapter, and in those chapters, there are short biographies of about anywhere from 15 to 30 women. And we said, this is your chapter, and you choose the woman that you want to feature tonight. So they had to have 2 requirements in order to do this. They had to be friends of the library, and they are. And they had to be gutsy, and they are. So it has been a joy putting this program together for you tonight. And before we do that, there are a couple things that we want to bring to your attention. While we were doing this program, or putting it together, we came across a lot of resources that are really they were valuable to us. Many of them are in our own library. So over here on the table, you'll see our collection of books connected to the women that you're going to meet tonight that might interest you and spark your interest to sign them out and bring them to the circulation desk and do something with them. And they are not all adult books. I'm a big fan of children's literature, and there is so much good stuff out there. And this is tribute to that because you're going to see some children's literature not only on the table, but built into the program. So I think I've set the stage. Is that enough, Bonnie, of a stage? Okay, let's look at this next slide then. Oh, okay. I'm very strict about this. There are little white cards on the table over by where Nancy is, and pencils. And most of you have your exit ticket in hand right now. This is your assignment. And as I said, I'm very strict about it. You're going to write one thing you learned tonight, one thing that was your aha moment, and meet me at the door and hand me your ticket. And that allows you to leave. Now, last year, and I tell you this all the time, 3 people did not give me their tickets. They have been living in this building all year, okay? And they are in this audience right now, and they can hardly wait to hand their ticket in tonight. All right, so I'm counting on you to do your exit ticket. All right, let's see what we're going to now, Bonnie. Well, let me see. I'm going to say that in the introduction that you have a number up there. We're featuring 11 presenters tonight, but look at you have 12 gutsy women that you're going to meet. Because when you're trying to wrangle 11 women, it's not easy. And every once in a while, one of them wants to break the rule. And one of them, who you're going to meet, no names mentioned yet, did 2 women, overachiever, 2 women. So you are really going to be privy to 12 remarkable women tonight. Let's flip over. Okay. Time for me to introduce. When we started this, I looked at each chapter, and each chapter had a theme. And this theme is early inspirations. And I looked through that chapter, and I said, oh my gosh, this is a remarkable collection of women. Who is going to be able to choose the one that stands out? And it's Tonya Himmelfarb. So let's welcome Tonya Himmelfarb.
So I was asked to review the first chapter of Gutsy Women and choose one person out of that chapter to talk about. And I thought, how am I going to choose one person? There's like 13, 14, 15 remarkable women in this chapter. So I read the chapter, and by the time I was finished, I knew that I was going to talk about Margaret Bourke-White. And why was that? Because I fell in love with this quote. Nothing attracts me like a closed door. For me, that was the embodiment of a gutsy woman. It was like you see a challenge and you rise to it. So who was Margaret Bourke-White? Well, if you're like me, you maybe had never heard of her before. But my guess is that you've maybe seen some of her photographs. Margaret was born in the Bronx in the early 1900s, and when she was a child, her father liked photography, so she and her dad would go out, her dad with the camera, she had a little empty cigar box that she pretended was her camera, and they'd go around and take pictures together, and then they'd go home and develop them in the family bathtub. But in spite of that early exposure to photography, Margaret didn't immediately want to become a photographer. Instead, she dreamed of traveling to exotic places, being a scientist, doing stuff that women normally didn't do. So when she finished high school, she had a hard time settling down. She went to 6 different colleges, she changed majors several times, and she even had one brief marriage. But finally, at her 7th college, Cornell, she needed some money to support herself. So she started taking pictures of the buildings on campus and selling them to alumni and to the student newspaper. And she earned a reputation for being willing to climb down manholes or scale the highest heights, anything to get the perfect picture. You can see she scaled some high heights. So her pictures were so good, or her photography was so good, that people started asking her, oh, are you studying to be an architectural photographer? And that's when she found her calling and her ticket to adventure. So when she finished finished college, Margaret decided to go to Cleveland to photograph the steel mills. And she arrived in Cleveland only to discover that steel mills were not open to women. Well, not one to be deterred, she talked her way into the steel mills and took some marvelous photos that showed the beauty of machinery. After that, she was hired by Fortune magazine and sent to Germany and the Soviet Union. But she arrived only to find out that the Soviet Union was closed to photojournalists. Again, she didn't take no for an answer, and she harassed the Soviet embassy in Germany until they finally gave her unlimited access to the Soviet Union. And she traveled around taking pictures, both of industry and of daily life. And it was at this point that her interest in architectural photography started shifting to human life. So Margaret returned to the United States, and it was a tough time in the United States right then. It was the time of the Dust Bowl and the Depression. So Fortune magazine sent Margaret to the Midwest to photograph the Dust Bowl, and then she was asked if she would collaborate with an author to document life in the South during the Great Depression. Margaret said yes, but things got off to a rocky start. She wasn't used to working with anybody else and didn't really like somebody telling her what she needed to take pictures of. But she thought about quitting, but then reconsidered and decided it was such an important project that she wanted to continue. And indeed, in the end, she ended up marrying the author, Erskine Caldwell. So about that time, a new magazine came into production in the United States. That was Life magazine. And one of Margaret's photographs graced the front cover of that magazine and also went on to become a postage stamp. So Life magazine then sent Margaret and her husband to Europe to document the rise of the rise of Nazism and the beginnings of World War II. And they did that for a while, then returned to the United States. And Erskine Caldwell, the husband, he persuaded Margaret to get a job with a local newspaper, and he started talking to her about having babies. Well, Margaret wasn't that interested in babies, and she didn't like the job at the newspaper because the quality of the photography was so poor. So she told her husband she was going back to Europe. He said, nope, I'm not interested in that. So the two separated, and she returned to Europe, where she was named the first female war correspondent accredited by the US military. So she spent the war years in Europe following the Allied troops through Germany, Italy, and North Africa. And then when the war ended, she stayed in Europe to photograph the aftermath and the liberation of the concentration camps. After that, she traveled to India to photograph Mahatma Gandhi and the Pakistan-India War, and to South Africa, where she documented apartheid. So throughout her life, Margaret documented, or she photographed and documented some of the most important people and events of her lifetime, and she ensured that we will always remember these people, these events, and these times. So I'd like to finish back on a personal note. When I was in the 5th grade, I read an article, probably in Life magazine, about Treblinka, one of the Nazi concentration camps. And I remember looking at those photos with horror, and I couldn't believe that people would treat other people that way. And I know that those pictures and that article influenced my feelings about justice and human rights and what it means to be a person. And so I feel like I'm living proof that somebody like Margaret Burke-White can use the power of photography to influence people and society. Thank you.
Incredible. Thank you, Tanya. When I got to the chapter featuring education, the first person that came to mind was Linda Hedges. Linda Hedges, 30 plus years in public education, probably the best fifth grade teacher on the planet. I'd like to introduce Linda Hedges.
Okay, I'm supposed to go really slow. Okay, because I talk really fast. Okay, kind of like that. I was assigned the Education Pioneer section in Gutsy Women because of my 32 years of service as a fifth grade teacher at Leif Nelson Elementary School. The tribute to Ruby Bridges caught my eye because I read her biography to my students every single year. She had a drastic effect on education in our country. That is why I chose to highlight her. Slow down, okay. I'm remembering. Okay. Ruby Bridges was born in 1954, the year of the landmark case, Brown versus the Board of Education. The court decision banned segregation in schools. After attending kindergarten in an all-black school, Ruby's parents wanted more for her. Ruby was one of 6 students who passed a test, which was needed to enter an all-white school in her area. Ruby entered first grade at Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans as the first black student in our country to attend an integrated school. She was escorted by federal marshals for her safety. Large crowds of angry white people gathered each morning, carrying signs, throwing objects, and calling her names. This treatment did not dissuade Ruby. Each morning, she would stop away from the crowd, and she would pray for those who hated her. Mrs. Barbara Henry, her teacher, was in awe of Ruby. As a child, she was always polite, hardworking, and didn't seem nervous or anxious. Ruby spent much of her year alone in the classroom, alone in a school with Mrs. Henry. Parents had pulled all their children out of the school in defiance of the court ruling. It was not until later in the year when 2 boys returned to the school once their parents grew tired of seeing the boys get into trouble around the home. 2 boys were soon eventually joined by other children, and by the time Ruby was in 2nd grade, the mobs had given up trying to scare Ruby. Over the following years, the other black children were enrolled in Frantz Elementary, and Ruby went on to graduate high school, become a successful businesswoman, an author, and a civil rights activist. As I reflected on the life of Ruby Bridges, I'm in awe of her calm composure in the midst of so much hate, the innocence of youth, and there were other supportive people who fit into this story and deserve the title of Gutsy as well. Her parents, who risked so much to ensure the best opportunity for their daughter, and her teacher, Mrs. Henry. I'm sure that her life was quite difficult given her choice to move from Boston in the hopes of integrating the school. These amazing people truly did change the face of education. There are numerous resources on the table connected to Ruby and her quest for educational equality. I'm going to highlight a children's book for you, which describes the mindset of our nation in 1960 and the strength of this young child in spite of it. Thank you.
Ruby Bridges Goes to School. My True Story by Ruby Bridges. A long time ago, some people thought that black people and white people should not be friends. In some places, black people were not allowed to live in the same neighborhoods as white people. In some places, black people were not allowed to eat in the same restaurants as white people. And in some places, black children and white children could not go to the same schools. This is called segregation. The United States government said, segregation is wrong. People should live where they want. People should eat where they want. Children should go to school where they want. My name is Ruby Bridges. In 1960, I went to kindergarten in a school for black children. I liked my school. I liked my teacher. I liked my friends. But there was a school for white children even closer to my house than the school for black children. It was the William Frantz Elementary School. The government said Ruby Bridges should be allowed to go to the William Frantz School. In 1961, I was in first grade. My mother took me to the France school. Marshals came with us to make sure that we were safe. Some people did not want a black child to go to the white school. They stood near the school. They yelled at me to go away. Parents took their children out of the school. I was alone with my teacher, Mrs. Henry. I loved Mrs. Henry, and Mrs. Henry loved me. I was a very good student. I learned math, I learned how to read, but I wish the children would come back. Months and months passed. Then one day, children began to come back to school. At last, I had friends to play with. I was very, very happy. Many people have read about me in newspapers and books. A famous writer, John Steinbeck, wrote about me. He wrote that I was very brave. A First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, wrote a letter to me. The letter told me that I was a good American. Norman Rockwell was an artist who painted a picture of me. The painting has become very famous. Now I am grown up. I am married. I have children. One day, Mrs. Henry and I were both asked to be on a TV show. That was the first time we had seen each other in many years. Now we talk to each other often. Now, black children and white children can go to the same schools. I like to visit schools. I tell my story to children. I tell children that black people and white people can be friends. And most important, I tell children to be kind to each other. Ruby Bridges Goes to School, My True Story by Ruby Bridges.
What can I say? Children's literature, wonderful. When we were looking at our next category, and I just had to hand this one over to Deborah Gibbs because there were some really unique women in there that are called Earth Defenders, and Deborah comes from a science background, so I thought this might be a good connection for her, and truly it was. So let's have Deborah Gibbs come up and speak to us. Thank you.
Okay, well, as Paulette said, I chose Dame. I got to put glasses on because you all know that I'm blinder than a bat, I think, if you know me. Okay. I chose Dame Valerie Jane Morris Goodall, and she's known better to all of us as Jane Goodall, to provide a quick overview about her life. And why? Why did I choose her? Well, in the late 1970s, when I was finishing my education at my bachelor's degree at the United States version, University of Hawaii, I was able to enroll in an elective where they were just doing her first book-length study called In the Shadow of Man. The book focused on her research in Tanzania, where she studied chimpanzee social and family life. It provides details of her studies and her findings, and the conclusions that it was only humans, beings that have a personality, who are capable of rational thought and emotions like joy and sorrow. She observed behaviors often considered human, such as hugs, kisses, pats on the back, and even tickling. She insisted these gestures were evidence of close, supportive, affectionate bonds that develop between family members and other individuals within a community, which can persist throughout a lifetime. And in 1934, she was born in London, England. She lived a full life, was married twice, and had one child. And she received several awards during her lifetime, to include the Presidential Medal of Freedom awarded by President Biden in January of 2025. She was asked once why she had such a love for animals. And she told a story about her dad. And her father had given her a small toy chimpanzee named Jubilee as an alternative to a teddy bear. And she said her fondness for Jubilee was what had sparked her early love of animals. Jane was an English primatologist and anthropologist, and is regarded as a pioneer in primate ethology and is described by many publications as the world's preeminent chimpanzee expert. She is best known for her 6 decades of field research, and that was done on social behavior of the wild chimpanzees in the Gombe Screen National Park in Tanzania. She began her career, served as a clerk, in 1957 with a chance meeting with Louis Leakey, and he was a Kenyan archaeologist. He had been looking for a chimpanzee researcher, but he kept it to himself and offered her a job as a secretary. And she took it. But a year later, he sent her to London to study primate behavior. And in 1960, she went into the forest to study the remarkable lives of chimpanzees. And she came out of the forest to save them. During her study, she discovered that the survival of their species was threatened by habitat destruction and illegal trafficking. She truly believed that humanity needed a new approach to species conservation to improve the lives of people, animals, and the environment by honoring their connection to one another. And to promote her theory, she founded the Jane Goodall Institute in 1977 to ensure her vision and life's work would continue to mobilize the collective power of individual action to save the natural world that we all share together. A little bit of a side note, though, when Jane went into the forest, she had to take her mom with her when she was doing her research. And the reason is she was going into a male-dominated field. And her mother, really said, hey, I think encouraged her to pursue this career. So her mother spent all of her time with her when she was in the Tanzania deserts. I thought that was pretty amazing. And Louis Leakey was so impressed with her that he got funding for her in 1962 to attend the University of Cambridge. Her thesis was completed in 1966, detailing her first 5 years of study in the Gombe Reserve. She has the distinction of being one of the school's first doctoral graduates who didn't first earn an undergraduate degree. It's pretty awesome. Anyway, she credited the 1986 Understanding Chimpanzee Conference with shifting her focus from observation of chimpanzees to broader and more intense concern with animal-human conservation. She led campaigns against the use of animals in medical research, zoos, farming, and sports. In 1991, she founded the Roots and Shoots program for youth. The mission of this organization is to empower young people to effect positive changes within their communities in order to build a better tomorrow. The organization provides support, resources, tools, leadership, and training to empower them to take action and lead changes within their communities. This organization has continued to grow and today has a global network. She was an outspoken environmental advocate, and throughout her life she remained an active lecturer, traveling extensively to promote conservation and climate action. She wrote 32 books and was the subject of over 40 films. She died this past October at the age of 91 in Beverly Hills. And after her death in December of 2025, the organization PETA, People of Ethical Treatment for Animals, awarded her their Person of the Year, commemorating her legacy of kindness. And now, there's a lot of information to give you about one person, but it always impressed me that she took such a path in life that we all think, oh, well, yeah, I heard about her working with the chimpanzees in her studies. But that's not where she stopped. When she came out, her interest continued to grow. When she was worried about mankind, she was worried about our climate. And then, she created this organization that is global to encourage our children to learn how to make it a better place for us to live. And that's why I chose her.
I was thrilled when she chose her because this is the first woman you're seeing that is not from the United States. Gutsy women live everywhere, right? And I'm hoping you're appreciating the incredible PowerPoint that Bonnie has put together. You know, that's all about being a great partner. Thank you.
I'm Cecilia B. DeMille.
Oh, Cecilia B. DeMille, very nice. Okay, a lot of people are too young for that. I don't know. Okay. All right, this is wonderful. Okay, Eva chose a wonderful woman named Madam C.J. Walker, and she actually has two names, so I love that. There are two people in one. And there's a really strong connection between Eva and Madam C.J., and you're going to hear it now. Bring her up. Yeah.
My choice for Gusty Woman is Sarah Breedlove, also known as Madam C.J. Walker. I can identify with this problem she addressed, hair care for black women. I've always had problems with taking care of my hair. My favorite answer to that was going to the hairdresser and relaxing. Let someone else deal with that. I can imagine how difficult it was for Sarah without the treatment of today. Born in 1867 on December 23rd in Delta, Louisiana, on a cotton plantation. Sarah Breedlove was the first freeborn of her family. There were 6 children, all born into slavery. History shows that she learned to work as soon as she could walk. She lost both her parents by the time she was 7. That's when she went to live with her sister in Mississippi, where she was abused by a family member. She never talked about it. As a young black girl, her only source of education was her church, where she learned to read. Most of her young life was spent working in other people's homes to support herself. She married her first husband at 14 and had 1 child at 17. After her husband died, she and her daughter, Aaliyah, moved to St. Louis near her brothers, where she worked as a washerwoman for 18 years. When Sarah began to lose her hair in her 30s, she tested lots of different remedies, some of which had been recommended to her by her 4 brothers, who were all barbers. She also tried the products of Annie Malone, a black woman hair care businesswoman. Sarah wasn't totally satisfied with anything she tried, so she began working on her own formula to fight hair loss. A combination of infrequent hair washings because of a lack of indoor plumbing and central heating, Nutri-Poor diets, and scalp disease help explain why hair loss was a fairly common challenge for black women in the 19th century. Sarah married again to John Davis and divorced in 1903. Little is known of John or the marriage. When Sarah's 3rd husband, Charles Joseph Walker, who had a vibrant career in advertising, encouraged her to start her own hair care line and to do it under the name Madam C.J. Walker because it sounded catchier. Sarah, now Madam C.J., began to do just that. Her hair care products, known as Madam Walker's Wonderful Hair Grower, were initially marketed in Denver, Colorado, where she worked as a sales distributor for Annie Malone. Annie later accused Madam C.J. of copying her formulas because the ingredients were the same. But Madam was able to show the formula was different and her marketing efforts were totally her own. She traveled across the country to demonstrate her signature products and treatment. Aaliyah managed the mail order branch of the business, her daughter. Sales grew so quickly that she opened her first factory the next year. She moved her business to Pittsburgh and then to Indianapolis to be closer to new markets and railroad lines. In 1910, she opened beauty schools to train beauticians on how to use the product line. She named the beauty school after her daughter, Aaliyah. In under a decade, she expanded to the Caribbean and worldwide, eventually building a workforce of 40,000 women and men, mostly black. Madam CJ became one of the wealthiest black women of her time and is known as the first self-made female millionaire, black or white. She was the first. There were white women who had money, but they were born in it or it was left to them. She created that success in less than 15 years. She would say, I got my start by giving myself a start. Madam CJ was a very giving person, using her money and considerable platform to support the YMCA and the NAACP, investing in education and speaking out against racism and lynching. She died of kidney failure in New York City in 1919 at the age of 52. It should be noted, if you want some product, you can get them from QVC or Walmart.
Amazing. Look at that house. I mean, really. Oh, goodness. Oh, well, our next one is going to come with a story, but first we need to hear from Sarah Skemp because she needs to tell you about this incredible Dr. Mary Edwards Walker.
Okay, I have to get in character. We're still in the 1800s, a little bit, where women were expected to wear corsets and icky dresses that were very tight and uncomfortable. But we're going to meet somebody who didn't think they had to. All right. So in the book, Gutsy Women, there are 13 healers, and they're all amazing, and they deserve your attention. So it was very challenging for me to focus on just one. So here we go. Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, women's rights advocate, abolitionist, spy, author, Medal of Honor recipient, and surgeon. These are great accomplishments, right? Oddly, it was not these things that made me choose her. It was her humble beginnings, being raised on her family farm, and her parents' encouragement to think freely in such a time that women were to act in a certain way per society's expectations. I grew up on my father's family farm, and my mother commented regularly that I needed to learn that there's this distinction between man-made rules or society rules and other rules like God's rules. And my parents weren't even religious. I loved how Mary's courage of being different, which was wearing pants, and we'll get into that later, was eventually told through a children's book. As a school counselor, it just made my heart happy to know that there's a story available for students to show that being different is okay, and we need to accept that. So, Mary Edwards Walker, who is she? She was born and raised on her family farm in Oswego, New York, by abolitionists. Her parents encouraged her to think freely and allowed her to wear bloomer pants, instead of those skirts and corsets. Her parents started the first free school in her hometown so the daughters would also be as educated as their sons. She taught for a few years, but knew she wanted to become a doctor. Mary was the only woman in her medical school class at Syracuse Medical College in 1855. She became the second woman to graduate from this college. Elizabeth Blackwell was the first woman. After graduation, she married. She wore pants under her wedding dress. Don't you love that one? She struck to obey out of the vows, and she kept her own name. She and her husband opened a medical practice, making sense. They were both doctors. Unfortunately, the practice did not succeed as people did not want a female doctor. That couple later divorced. You probably could figure out why. Now it's 1861, the Civil War begins. Mary desperately, she wanted to be a surgeon. She was qualified. However, she couldn't enlist as a surgeon because, she was a woman. So initially she was called a nurse, and then she became, even with those physician's credentials, she was very qualified. They didn't recognize her for that. Well, because women weren't allowed to enlist, Mary had to do something. She volunteered. And so she traveled to Union Fields hospitals. She watched other surgeons perform dangerous, unnecessary amputations on soldiers. She discreetly advised soldiers against the procedures when she thought they were not warranted. After the war, she received thank you letters from these patients from whose limbs she'd healed. When her credentials were finally accepted in 1863, she became the first female U.S. Army surgeon, and then finally was paid for her skill as a surgeon. During the Civil War, she sported bloomers or dress with pants. She even designed her own uniform, a blue with green sash, similar to the physicians in the battlefield. Dedicated to her craft, Mary crossed enemy lines to treat the wounded and then was arrested by Confederate forces as the spy. Really? She was held prisoner of war for 4 months before she and her colleagues were exchanged man for man for Confederate medical officers. While in prison, she refused to wear the men's uniform. She was a little feisty, wasn't she? After her release, she was contracted as a surgeon and served through the end of the war. Despite being contracted and experienced months in the Confederate prison, she was still only classified as a civilian employee, not a soldier. So what? Well, it's about money. Thus, she was ineligible for the pensions. Well, she was eventually offered a small pension, $8.50 a month, for health reasons stemming from her imprisonment. Note that is far less than what soldiers made as commissions for their retirement. Mary was not only a surgeon, she was also an activist. She famously wore pants and advocated for dress reform. She was arrested more than once for wearing men's clothing, including her signature top hat. Mary's response to critics was, "I don't wear men's clothes. I wear my own clothes." In 1871, Mary published a partly autobiographical book titled Hit, Essays on Women's Rights. That's her activism. And now this would be a perfect opportunity to share the children's book, Mary Wears What She Wants, by Keith Negley.
Mary wears what she wants. Once upon a time, but not too long ago, girls weren't allowed to wear pants. Can you imagine? The only thing girls could wear were uncomfortable dresses. Heavy and hot and hard to breathe in dresses. Tied too tight and can't bend over dresses. It's the way things have always been and the way things will always be, they said, and no one thought it should be any different. Actually, that last part's not entirely true. Mary thought it should be different, and she had an idea. A very daring idea. A great idea. Mary liked it so much she went into town to show everyone. It was kind of a big deal. And not everyone liked it. "You're gonna regret wearing pants, Mary Walker," they all said. "No, I won't," Mary said back. But she kind of did. Mary didn't understand why everyone cared so much about what she wore. "They've never seen a girl wearing pants before," said her father. "Sometimes people get scared of what they don't understand." "So I should go back to wearing dresses?" asked Mary. "I didn't say that," said her dad. That night, Mary didn't get a wink of sleep. The next morning, Mary decided she didn't like being told what to wear. Pants were just plain better in all sorts of ways. As she left for school, she discovered she could even walk faster in pants. Which Mary really appreciated. But when Mary got to school, it was more of the same. She started to worry this was how things were going to be from now on. "I'd like to go to school, please," said Mary. "But you're wearing boys' clothes," they all said. "I'm not wearing boys' clothes," said Mary. "I'm wearing my clothes. Now, if you'll excuse me, please, I'm late for school." And with that, she pushed through the door and went inside, prepared for even more of the same. Except it wasn't the same at all. And it was never the same again.
To wrap up a little more about Mary Walker. It was in 1865 that Mary was the first and only woman awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. In 1917, Congress rescinded the medal, along with hundreds of others, citing a lack of combat experience. Dr. Walker refused to give the medal back. Instead, she wore it every day until her death in 1919. 6 decades later, in 1977, President Jimmy Carter reinstated the award. You going to tell the hat story? There's a hat story. Besides Mary.
There is a backstory to this hat. And if you know any of the Estes family, they're an incredible family that spend a lot of time at the library. And the boys wear hats. Well, one of them wears this red and white thing that's like mushrooms, and another one wears kind of a top hat, which is like a Willy Wonka hat. I happened to see that one, that's Doug Estes, in the bank one day last month. And I went up to him and asked if I could borrow his hat for this presentation. And you could see the panic in his face that, number one, I don't ever take the hat off. And number two, who are you? So by luck, his father happened to be in the bank with him. And he came over and he said, "What's going on?" So I told him the story about the need for the top hat. And he looked at me and he said, and his name is Nathan Estes. Nathan said, "Well, you know what? I'm going to make her a hat." And he did. And then he said, and guess what? She can keep it. So this is now Sarah's top mat. It's a wonderful backstory, wonderful story. Where are we going now, Bonnie? Ah, Michelle Kwan. This is wonderful. I'm so glad that Donna chose Michelle Kwan because I had to learn that there was more to her than a pair of skates. And you're going to find that out right now.
Glasses too. I selected Michelle Kwan not only because she was more than or is more than a pair of skates, but there is a familial connection to me with Michelle, but more on that later. You'll have to wait here. Michelle was born July 7th, 1980 in Los Angeles, the daughter of immigrants from China who came to the United States in the 1970s. Her father, Danny, worked for the telephone company, and her mother, Estelle, ran the family-owned Chinese restaurant. She's the youngest of 3 siblings, having a brother, Ron, and sister, Karen. When Michelle was 5 years old, she followed her siblings into skating, participating in lessons at the local ice rink. Ron played hockey, and Karen and Michelle did figure skating. It was clear early on each girl was not only talented, but also determined, and before long, weekly lessons became daily. Figure skating is a very expensive sport, so to support their daughters, the Kwans sold their house and moved into one that Danny's parents owned. When the girls earned scholarships to train at an elite rink 100 miles away from home, Danny moved with the girls, and Estelle stayed back with Ron. Despite many disadvantages, Michelle rose quickly into the ranks of elite skaters. I made it to the national championships in used skates that were custom made for another girl, she reported. I still have those skates. Underneath the arch, there was a name crossed out, and my dad had written Michelle Kwan. But I didn't feel disadvantaged. I felt empowered because I had these opportunities. I was going to make the most of it. In 1996, at 16, Michelle won her first U.S. national championship and world championship titles with programs that were both technically difficult and artistically beautiful. She didn't fare as well the following years, with struggles from injuries, growth spurts, and her own shaken self-confidence. However, in spite of a stress fracture in her foot, she became the first woman in history to receive a perfect score for her short program at the Nationals the following year. Heading into the 1998 Olympics Games in Nagano, Japan, she was the clear favorite to win gold. Even though she was only 18, she was talked about as the seasoned veteran compared to up-and-coming 15-year-old Tara Lipinski. Although both skated at the top of their games that night on the Olympic ice, Michelle finished second behind Tara, winning the silver medal. Michelle continued to dominate women's figure skating, winning 7 consecutive national titles and 3 more world titles. For the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City, she was also favored to medal and finished with the bronze. She also qualified for the 2006 Olympics in Turin, but had to drop out because of injuries and ultimately retired from skating. She became the most decorated figure skater in U.S. history, winning 5 world championships, 9 U.S. national championships, and 2 Olympic medals. Despite never obtaining an Olympic gold medal, she always said how fortunate she was to even medal at all. After skating, she put all her efforts towards degrees and work in international affairs. In 2005, Condoleezza Rice named her a public ambassador, and she traveled around the world pursuing diplomacy through sports. During this time, she also worked with Vice President Biden and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She later became outreach coordinator for each of their presidential campaigns. In 2022, President Biden nominated her as ambassador to Belize, and she served in that position until January 2025. Michelle currently devotes her time as a single parent towards raising her 2 daughters, born in 2022 and 2025 via IVF. On and off the ice, Michelle truly qualifies as a gutsy gal. Despite overwhelming odds, she dominated her sport for over a decade and then poured her determination into a diplomatic career. She is proof you can be more than one thing: powerful and graceful, fiercely competitive and a good sport, accomplished athlete and student, and an Olympian and public servant. And as to my connection to Michelle, my paternal grandfather's half-sister was Maribel Vincent Owens. Maribel was a famous figure skater and coach who tragically died in 1961, along with the entire U.S. skating team on their way to the World Championships in Prague. In 2005, Michelle tied Maribel's long-standing record for the most U.S. national women's figure skating championships at 9. Vincent was somewhat of a mentor by proxy for Michelle. Michelle trained with Frank Carroll for 9 years, and he would often talk about Maribel, who had been his coach, the lessons she taught him, and the high standards she set. That Michelle had the staying power and the success of matching Vincent even surprised her. Going into that national championship, she reported, "I feel a sense of cosmic connection because of Maribel Vincent Owens and Frank Carroll. So this is a very special year for me." Thank you.
Oh, there are 2 pictures up here. This is the one who broke the rule that I talked about earlier. But there's a very good reason why Paula is going to come up and talk to you about 2 incredible women, 100 years apart, who are interconnected. Come on up, Paula.
I didn't know I broke a rule. But anyway, I chose Dorothy Height. I'd never heard of her, but Hillary called her Miss Height, and she had a life of activism, and it included bringing recognition to another woman activist who lived a century before. I was struck by how one generation's fight can light a fire in the next. Sojourner Truth, that's the one that lived in the prior century, was named Isabella when born in 1797 in Dutch-speaking Ulster County, New York. She was born into slavery. At age 9, she was sold at a slave auction and then sold 2 more times. When the state of New York announced all slaves would be freed on July 4, 1827, Isabella's master told her he'd release her a year early. When he didn't keep his promise, she ran away in broad daylight with her infant daughter and found shelter with an abolitionist family. When the master came to take her back, the family paid $20 so she wouldn't have to spend another year as a slave. Soon afterwards, Isabella discovered that her 5-year-old son had been sent to Alabama. Now, Alabama, they didn't have a rule about releasing slaves in 1827. So it was illegal to sell a slave out of state, and she did something extraordinary. She sued a white man in court, and she won. There were penalties, big penalties, for selling a slave out of state. Without his mother's courage, son Peter would have remained a slave in Alabama. There was the second great religious movement in America happened in the early and middle 1800s, and Isabella was working during the 1830s. She worked for 2 preachers, and I think that may have influenced her, because in 1843 she decided to change her name to Sojourner Truth, and she left New York. She put her things in a pillowcase, and she said, "The Spirit calls me, and I must go." She would become a powerful and charismatic speaker for the abolition of slavery. Although she never learned to read or write, in 1850 she dictated her memoir, and Paulette actually gave me a copy, and there's a copy of it. It's very interesting. She dictated it, so it's a little different reading, and she was careful not to say really bad things about some of her masters. And actually some at the end actually talked about her, what a good slave she was, and how they were sorry that they had believed in slavery at that time. The book she dictated was the narrative of Sojourner Truth, the Northern Slave. She got some money from the sale of the book, and she bought a house in Michigan. In 1851, Sojourner began a lecture tour that included the Ohio Women's Rights Convention in Akron, where she delivered her famous Ain't I a Woman speech. This address became one of the most powerful statements in American history because it exposed the dual oppression faced by black women, both racism and sexism. She later met women's rights leaders Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and joined their fight for equality. During the Civil War, although she was a pacifist, she helped recruit black soldiers for the Union Army, calling the war a fair punishment from God for the crime of slavery. She even met with President Lincoln. Later, she met Ulysses S. Grant. She campaigned for him, and she tried to vote. Sojourner continued speaking out about abolition, women's rights, prison reform, and capital punishment until her death in 1883 in Battle Creek, Michigan, at about the age of 86. Now, Dorothea Height was the one that Hillary and Chelsea had met. And she was born in 1913 in Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy. As a child, the family moved to Pennsylvania. In high school, she won a national oratory contest, complete with a college scholarship. She was accepted at Barnard College, but later denied admission because the college had already accepted 2 black women, their quota at the time. A few years after graduating from college, Ms. Height joined the National Council of Negro Women, beginning a career fighting for civil rights and equality for black Americans and women. She served as its president for 40 years. In 1963, she was one of the organizers of the famed March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. She was the unheralded 7th of the Big Six. That was Martin Luther King and 5 other men, and she was called the unheralded 7th. She stood near Martin Luther King Jr. when he delivered his I Have a Dream speech. Ms. Height later wrote that the March on Washington event had been an eye-opening experience for her. Her male counterparts were happy to include women in the human family, but there was no question as to who headed the household, she said. She continued advocating for women's equality and helped found the National Women's Political Caucus with Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, and Shirley Chisholm. Her activism attracted the notice of Eleanor Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, Lyndon Johnson. She later received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Clinton and the Congressional Gold Medal from George W. Bush. Barack Obama called her the godmother of the Civil Rights Movement. She died in 2010 at the age of 98. It was Dorothea Height who spent 10 years advocating for a bust of Sojourner Truth in the U.S. Capitol. It was finally installed in 2009, a year before her death. The bust is located in Emancipation Hall, a hall named to honor the slaves who built the Capitol. It is the first sculpture of a black woman in the Capitol. Dorothea Height and Sojourner Truth were 2 remarkable women who led parallel lives of activism in 2 different centuries.
I keep thinking of your exit ticket, and what's the one, how can you narrow it down to one thing that you've learned tonight? Oh my gosh, oh my goodness. You know, there are snowbirds and there are snowbirds. And I know a snowbird who joined Friends of the Library, joined a book club, reads poetry, her own poetry to us, and is actively involved in Graham County as a snowbird. Who does that? Joyce Benvenuto. Come on up.
I'm here representing Maya Angelou, who is a United States poet. And Maya Angelou, when she was scheduled to do a performance at Michigan State University for the performing arts, my patron gave my students and I 10 tickets to go and see her, and I was delighted. However, I could not attend since I was teaching school. So I simply gave the 10 tickets to my best black students and arranged for them to get to the theater. And they did. And then later in the day of the performance, as I dismissed my late afternoon class, I found my 10 students all waiting for me at the door. They were there to enthusiastically thank me for allowing them to see Maya Angelou. It made their day. They said she was amazing. She talked directly to young people, encouraging them to fearlessly engage their lives and do what they dreamed they might possibly accomplish. And I was thrilled. The afternoon had accomplished what I had hoped for. My kids had been in the presence of the great lady herself. Maya Angelou died fairly recently. She was born April 4th, 1928, and died, she was born April 29th, and died May 28th, 2014. In her lifetime, she was a visible presence everywhere. Black people needed a voice. Not only did she deliver her poem in the pulse of mourning at the inauguration of Bill Clinton, but she appeared in black films, published many books, and did poetry readings across the USA. She was a great performer. She was about 6 feet tall and had a deep, booming voice that turned heads everywhere. She taught at more than one college, and she had more than one college degree. Maya grew up in Stamps, Arkansas, in very hard time poverty. Her personal tragedy was that she was raped by an uncle when she was 8 years old. This traumatized her for life. However, she turned lemons to lemonade by confronting this brutal memory and writing about it in her novel, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She believed that her story of humiliation should help others who had suffered likewise, and she wanted them to know that they were not to blame for what had happened to them. She became the sweetheart of struggling young women everywhere. Accordingly, when I would be teaching my classes, I would read her poem, Phenomenal Woman, to my students. And my girls' students loved it. And one of the things they would do would get 3 or 4 of them together, and they would all recite it in unison in front of the class. So this is a perfect opportunity to introduce you to a piece of her poetry, which is Phenomenal Woman. Maybe some of you have heard it, maybe not. But this is one of Maya's most famous poems. Pretty women wonder where my secret lies. I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model size. And when I start to tell them, they think I'm telling lies. And I say, it's the reach of my arms, the span of my hips, the stride of my step, the curl of my lips. I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me. I walk into a room just as cool as you please, and to a man, the fellows stand or fall down on their knees. Then they swarm around me, a hive of honey bees. They say, or I say, it's the fire in my eyes and the flash of my teeth, the swing of my wrist and the joy in my feet. I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me. Men sometimes have wondered what they see in me. They try so much, but they can't touch my inner mystery. When I try to show them, they say they still can't see. And I say, it's in the arch of my back, the stun of my smile, the ride of my breasts, the grace of my style. I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me. Now, you understand. That's why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump about or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, I ought to make you proud. And I say, it's in the click of my heels, the bend of my hair, the palm of my hand, the need for my care, 'cause I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me.
Thank you, Joyce. We are moving to, I'm going to call it Oklahoma and California now, because we're going to meet Wilma Mankiller, another incredible woman, and Deanna's going to tell us all about her.
Many of you know that I lost my daughter suddenly in January. She was a person who deserves to be remembered as a gutsy woman. Therefore, I'm dedicating this part of my presentation to her, my daughter, Karen Christine Hertz, who would have been 60 years old today. Why did I choose Wilma Mankiller from the many elected leaders presented in the book? About a year ago, Joyce Evans and I were asked to chair a quarterly meeting of the Native American Ministry for the Episcopal Diocese of Arizona. As we did our due diligence for the meeting, we discovered we were two old white women who were completely naive about the horrors visited upon indigenous people by our own government. The injustices continue to this day. Wilma Mankiller lived this history as a woman who rose to lead the Cherokee Nation, make a difference to her people, and possibly change a few minds along the way. Wilma was born November 18, 1945, in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, the sixth of 11 children, born to a full-blooded Cherokee father and a Dutch-Irish mother. Though her surname faced ridicule, Mankiller is a Cherokee word meaning village protector. She spent much of her childhood on a tract of land given to her grandfather by the government as part of a settlement for brutally forcing the Cherokee to Oklahoma from the southeast. At the age of 10, the government moved her family to San Francisco, California. Wilma hated school and had no friends. Later, she realized that education would set her free, and she certainly learned to get along with others. As a teenager, Wilma found her home away from home at the San Francisco Indian Center. She married a month before her 18th birthday and had 2 daughters. Her husband expected her to play the traditional role of housewife and mother, but eventually this clashed with the social change she saw all around her in California in the 60s. Everything was happening right there in San Francisco. Thank you. Then, in 1969, a group of Native Americans occupied the abandoned Alcatraz prison and claimed the island in the name of all Indian tribes. Wilma's life changed forever. During the 19 months of occupation, Wilma helped raise funds and awareness. The more she did, the more involved she wanted to be with Native American issues. She started taking college courses in social work. She bought her first car. She danced with her daughters to Aretha Franklin's Respect. When her husband demanded she remain a traditional housewife, she resolved that tension by divorcing him. She and her daughters moved back to her grandfather's land in Oklahoma. In 1979, Wilma was severely injured in a head-on car crash. The woman killed in the other car was her best friend. Recovery required nearly a year, which Wilma spent reflecting on her future. She immersed herself in Cherokee traditions, embracing the idea of being of good mind. Her physical challenges were not over, but a neuromuscular disease that made moving difficult did not deter her. Even a kidney transplant in 1990 did not slow her down. She orchestrated a self-help project on the Cherokee Reservation, which pulled the community together to solve their own problems. And she supervised the construction of a water system and the upgrade of substandard housing. Because of her work, Ms. Magazine named her Woman of the Year in 1987. Wilma's second husband, Charlie Soap, supported her entry into politics, and she was recruited to run for deputy principal chief in 1983. She expected politics to be the issue, but it was all about being a woman. She once commented that she had run into more discrimination as a woman than as an Indian. She overcame opposition, harsh criticism, and death threats to win the election. After 2 years in that position, she was elected in her own right as chief of the Cherokee Nation. Once again, she faced sexist attacks, which surprised her because the traditional Cherokee society is matriarchal. She drew on those traditions of Cherokee culture to pave the way for service as the first female chief of the Cherokee Nation. Under Wilma's leadership, the Cherokee government instituted many programs of improvement, and she was tireless in working to improve respect for Native Americans across the country. When she retired, she stayed active promoting women's rights, tribal sovereignty, cancer awareness. She was active in a program matching Cherokee girls with career mentors to build confidence and expand opportunities. In 1998, President Clinton awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Sadly, Wilma died of pancreatic cancer in 2010 at the age of 65. Thank you.
Incredible. Thank you. Thank you. If you haven't heard of Frances Perkins, you're in for a surprise because there is not one person here who is not affected by the work of Frances Perkins. Let's have Angie come up and tell us about it.
Every month, 72 million Americans receive benefits from Social Security. Tens of millions go home after an 8-hour workday. Those who lost their jobs can rely on unemployment insurance. Children go to school instead of working in factories or in the mines. Fire alarms and sprinkler systems are a fact of life. We have a federal a federal minimum wage, which is too low, mandated and enforced by law. All these facts of modern working life are due to the efforts of one woman, Frances Perkins. Frances was the first to do many things, the first woman named to a seat on New York's powerful Industrial Commission, where her annual salary, $8,000, made her the highest paid woman in state government. And the very first Madam Secretary, when she led the U.S. woman, I can't get my focus on my son, made her highest paid woman in the state government, the first ever Madam Secretary when she led the U.S. Department of Labor for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Frances was born April 1880 in Boston, Massachusetts, as Fanny Coralie Perkins to a middle-class family. She graduated from Mount Holyoke College in 1902. One of her professors assigned the students to tour a factory to study working conditions. Perkins recalled this tour as an important influence. After college, she worked at Jane Addams's Hull House, an innovative settlement. She also took a dangerous job working to prevent sex trafficking in Philadelphia and literally stood on soapboxes to advocate for women suffrage. On March 25, 1911, while working for the National Consumers League, she witnessed the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, a pivotal event in her life. The factory employed hundreds of workers, mostly young immigrant women, but it lacked fire escapes. In addition, the owner kept all the doors and stairwells locked in order to prevent the employees from taking breaks. The fire ladders could not reach the upper stories of the factory. She watched in horror as workers crowded in the windows until one by one, many chose to jump rather than to burn to death. 146 workers died. Perkins blamed poor legislation for the loss. It was the worst industrial fire in the history of New York City and one of the worst in the United States. That fire changed the course of American labor history. Frances became executive secretary of a new Citizens Committee on Industrial Safety. During the next 4 years, New York State adopted dozens of safety laws, and Frances's fingerprints were all over them. In 1913, Frances married Paul Wilson, but she kept her surname, Perkins, which was incredibly rare and controversial for the time. She wanted to preserve her own identity and had already made a name for herself. She defended her right to keep the name in court. The couple had a daughter, Susanna, in 1916. Soon Wilson began to show signs of mental illness. Later, he had to be committed to a hospital. Throughout the remainder of her marriage, Perkins had to provide for her family and keep them out of the spotlight. Being on the New York Industrial Commission under Governors Al Smith and Franklin D. Roosevelt, she helped organize factory inspections, settled strikes, and most importantly, established a reputation as one of the nation's leading experts on labor unions. And the labor unions hated her. When Roosevelt became president in 1933, he asked her to be a part of his administration, promising the public a New Deal. She knew there was no plan behind the idea, so she moved forward to craft her list of initiatives. Public employment, 40-hour work weeks, federal minimum wage, banning child labor, unemployment insurance, establishing Social Security, and universal health care. And she said to Roosevelt, "Nothing like this has ever been done in the United States before. You know that, don't you?" Roosevelt agreed to back her and nominated her to be Secretary of Labor. It involved a complete rewriting of contracts between government, employers, and workers, item by item. Most of that list became the law of the land. The Social Security Act became law in August of 1935. Frances served all 12 years of FDR's presidency and briefly under President Truman. She had been labeled a communist and survived impeachment attempt by her enemies in Congress, all the while weaving together different groups into America's social safety net. The curator of Social Security worked until just a few weeks before she died in 1965. Despite the immense changes she faced in her personal and professional life, Frances's tenacity and vision allowed her to make a difference in the lives of countless people across generations.
We have come to our last presentation tonight, and it's a woman that I had never run into, and so it's such a treat to learn about people that are working and doing exciting things now. And Janice is going to come up and tell you all about it.
If you're a woman and you own your own property and earn a fair wage, you can thank a gutsy woman. If you're wearing pants, thank a gutsy woman. If you vote, thank gutsy women. If you've ever been on birth control, you can thank gutsy women. If you have credit cards, if you own your own business, or if you've been granted a divorce, you can thank a gutsy woman. In the category of women's rights, I chose Freddie Reese because she overcame something that still exists today, even in the United States: the entrapment
of forced early marriage. Frady Reese grew up in an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York. In that community, marriages are often arranged very young, and women are expected to follow strict religious and social rules. Frady was pressured into an arranged marriage with a man she barely knew. Like many young women in similar situations, she believed she had little choice. Saying no would have meant losing her family, her community, and everything she had ever known. Very quickly, the marriage became abusive. She was isolated, controlled, and afraid. But leaving wasn't simple. In her religious community, divorce required the husband to grant a religious document called a get. Without it, a woman can be trapped indefinitely, unable to remarry within the faith, and often shunned by the community. Frady eventually found the courage to escape with her young children. She fled the marriage with almost nothing, no money, little support, and the very real fear of losing her kids or being forced back into the relationship. She relied on shelters, public assistance, and the help of people who believed women deserve the right to live free from coercions and abuse. Instead of just rebuilding her own life, Frady decided to do something extraordinary. She turned her experience into a mission to help others. In 2011, she founded Unchained at Last, the only nonprofit organization in the United States dedicated to helping women and girls escape forced and child marriages. The organization provides legal help, housing assistance, financial support, and emotional guidance for people trying to leave marriages they were pressured or forced into. Many people assume forced marriage is only a problem in other countries. But Frady's work revealed something surprising and troubling. In many of our states, loopholes in marriage laws allowed minors to marry with parental or judicial consent. And once married, those minors often lose important legal protection. For example, they may not be able to file for divorce, access shelters, or even sign legal contracts without adult approval. Frady Reese and her organization began advocating for stronger laws to protect children from forced marriage. Through research, public education, and legislative advocacy, they helped expose how legal systems sometimes enable abuse rather than prevent it. Because of her work, several states have passed laws raising the minimum marriage to 18, with no exceptions. That list continues to grow. These changes help ensure children cannot be legally married off before they are old enough to fully consent and protect themselves. Frady Reese's story is powerful because it shows the ripple effect of one person's courage. She went from being a young woman trapped in an abusive marriage to becoming a national advocate who has helped countless others find safety and freedom. Her work reminds us that women's rights are not just history, they are ongoing struggles. The freedoms many women enjoy today were won because someone, somewhere, refused to accept injustice. So when we talk about gutsy women who changed the world, Frady Reese belongs in that conversation. She didn't just accept a system that trapped her. She built a path for others to escape. And that is what real courage looks like, turning personal pain into collective freedom.
While Bonnie's getting up here to do the epilogue, I want to thank our 11 Graham County Gutsies. When we entered this project, I leaned on my mantra, if you want to get a job done, ask a busy woman. And these busy ladies just stepped up to the plate and did a marvelous job. Thank you, I love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you don't know Bonnie Briscoe, this is Bonnie Briscoe, who's going to wrap up the evening for us.
Oh, is that right? Okay. I think we ought to give a big applause for the organizer here. Woo! You know, wrangling 11 gutsy women in the area is not an easy task. But they did don't you think they did a beautiful job? Oh. You have just met some gutsy women, courageous and resilient. 12 women who've made a difference in the world during their lifetime. And you've also met another set of gutsy women who live in this area and continue to make a difference in the lives of others. In fact, the spirit of the women sitting around you and the spirit within you are courageous and resilient. Each of us probably visualize the meaning of gutsy in different ways. Some women have a strong voice, some a soft one. Some push to get things done, and some work quietly but continuously in the background. Through centuries, through decades, through generations, the contributions of women and young girls have been recognized more and more, whether shouting out in a rally or on the steps of a schoolhouse with U.S. Marshals. Regardless of their personalities and ages, they are being heard more and more as they create a change for good. Today, women are running countries and cities across the globe. They are leading Fortune 500 companies, running their own enterprises, making award-winning films, shattering records in sports and medical fields, inventing revolutionary technologies, to name just a few of many. In our U.S. Congress, there are more than 100 women representing us. A little over a century ago, most women in America, like my grandmother, could not vote. And speaking of grandmothers, we can think back across our own lives to remember those, related or not related, who inspired us, who educated us, and who challenged us. Some were famous and some were not well known. They were those who had the courage to stand up to the status quo, ask hard questions, and to be resilient in getting the job done, whether loudly or softly. Many women have done heroic things, but they are not superheroes. Like everyone else, they are complex, imperfect human beings. But they make a better world, and we draw strength from these women. The world has always needed them, these courageous, resilient, gutsy women. In closing, may you reflect on the courageous and resilient women in your life. And don't forget to reflect on the courageous and resilient spirit within yourselves. Thank you. Shall we release them?
Yes, we can't release them until they put something in my hand. So I'm going to go, first of all, please feel free to visit each other, get some snacks as well. We don't want to take everything home. And then I'm going to be at the door collecting your exit ticket.